woman in her 40s, somewhere in them. And I don't and as you know, I've heard a lot of things, and I don't know if you went through this when you were getting divorced, but I heard a lot of people tell me to stay married because it was hard
Mm,
out here. And for a girl with 2 kids, it was going to be really difficult. And of my lovely advanced years, that it would be harder for me to find a partner, which I wholeheartedly
mhm.
dismissed and didn't believe in. Obviously, I'm single. But what would you say for women who are feeling like that? Like, you know what? I don't have time to waste on these guys. I see, they're making all these mistakes. I don't have time to be forgiving all these mistakes. I got to be on to the next one. What would you recommend?
If they keep making the mistakes and there is no change behavior, then move on. You don't want to stay with someone who you can't build a relationship with, because a relationship is alive. We both bring something to it, and we take care of it. We change, we grow, we take care of one another. So I think, one mistake, okay, let's communicate. Second mistake, let's communicate. But if there's a pattern of behavior, then don't waste your time. But don't
Yeah.
run before you communicate it. If it's someone that is aligned with what you want, don't run before you communicate. Don't run before you try a boundary. Don't run before you clarify.
Mhm. I love the clarification part because I definitely have been guilty of presuming someone's
Mhm.
intention was one thing and then
Mm,
going through a whole series of emotions behind it, right? Then
yeah.
talking to them later and realizing I was way off base, right? And I took myself through all of that for
Yeah.
literally no reason. That was my young girl mistake, honey, and that was a
Yeah.
hard one to get get past. But something else I also wanted to bring up, which is definitely a red flag for me, and I think you would agree, is that you mentioned communication a few times. And I think that we've heard this a lot of times that communication is the key to relationships, right? But I
Mm,
think we hear it so much that it like loses something, like it just becomes like passive, and I think it's really important because sometimes you will you can't build a relationship with a partner who won't communicate. And there are some people that, like you mentioned earlier, like to sweep everything under the rug or like allow time to pass by and then everything should be peachy keen again. And you've never resolved that issue. And it just seems like they
mm,
are unwilling to actually communicate, and you can never communicate even if you want to have a healthy conversation about it. It's like somehow they manipulate the situation to where you feel like you can never discuss it, and I feel like that's a red flag and something that you can't build with.
If somebody is never willing to discuss something, then it's going to be difficult to build a relationship, because that issue is not going anywhere. If it's been swept under the rug, it's there. You're going to trip over it sooner or later. But communication is also an issue of connection, and it's a two-way street. Sometimes we want to communicate with someone in the way that we communicate, in the way that we perceive the world through our assumptions, not through the way they perceive and see the world and their assumption. Communication is Problems with communication are very often problems with connection. As you know, I'm lean anxious on the attachment scale. I'm very secure now. My husband leaned avoidant. So we are like the nightmare that's supposed to be. And our communication styles can be extremely different. It is my job, as the more emotionally attuned as anxious attachers are in some ways, to make sure that if I communicate to him, if I bring an issue, something that I want to address, I create an environment that is safe for him, that I take into consideration how his inner response to my communication, because I know, because I care about him. I love the guy. That he's going to get defensive if I come straight, say, "Listen, you did that wrong." That feels to him as an attack. He goes on a defensive. We have a conflict. If I come to it, "Hey, I I know you do all of those things and I so appreciate it. And that thing made me feel, or the way I perceived it, is a completely different story. If I come at from my with my healthy communication, he will hear me. But very often we think the problem is the communication, where the problem is the connection, because the way we approach the communication cuts connection before the communication can happen.
I see. So, I know we did a whole talk about attachment styles before, so I won't dive too deep into it. But there are, what are there, 4 attachment styles?
Yes.
And there are, I know that in the past I've leaned, so I came through anxious as a young woman, and then I became more of a fearful avoidant, which means I can be anxious in the way I
Mhm.
connect in relationships, but I can also be avoidant. And it hits a point a lot of times where
Hmm.
I'm just ready to run away, right? Like, and it's a conscious effort to work through that.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think now more I lean towards being secure, but I can be triggered back into
Yeah.
becoming a fearful avoidant. Um, and I definitely usually end up, my type, I think, is avoidant partners or fearful avoidant partners, right? So either the same as me, or, but usually if they're fearful avoidant, they will be leaning more avoidant. And so
Hmm.
the avoidant style of person is more a person who grew up where they had to self soothe, right?
Yeah.
And they were more independent as a young child, having to meet their own needs. So they have less need for connection than an anxious person. And an anxious
Hmm.
person is more clingy, right? They're more anxious about the relationship. And if things go wrong, they just in a hurry to fix everything and get the connection and the relationship back
Hmm.
to where they feel safe. Did I get that right? Because I'm trying to remember it from our last.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You're spot on. The avoidant person often grows up in an environment where they are just left to fend for themselves emotionally, or their emotional needs are invalidated, or oh, you have nothing to cry about, mm, get over it. Or
Mhm.
sometimes it's an overbearing parent where where the child just recoils because it's too much for them at once. It overwhelms the system. Anxiously attached people grow up in environments where they don't know where the connection is going to happen, if it's going to be there, if it's not going to be there. There is some, but it's not consistent. So they learn to be hyper vigilant for it, to keep it. Fearful avoidance are a bit less defined in their patterns of reaction, usually grow up with caregivers who um, they feared in some way. So often it can be traumatic, but it's very traumatic, as in, big news trauma. But sometimes it can be just someone who was a scary parent, who, at the same time, the person who is responsible for my food nurture keeping me alive is also the source of fear. And that is a very conflicting state to grow up in for a young nervous system, for a young mind. And that's how usually our fearful avoidance are created. But it's all just like a software, so we can all actually overcome it. And relationships can move us between, shift us from one pattern to another.
Wow. So, I mean, relationships can be really triggering, but they can be really healing too, right? Because once we get triggered, we have the opportunity to see what comes up and heal that. Because I know, and I'm speaking that from experience. That's not a question. Like I know that has happened so many times, and
No question.
especially in the last relationship, honey. I was in every course. Um, learning so much about healing my inner child and all of this stuff. And I
Yeah.
probably could teach a course on it now. But definitely, I think it's important because a lot of people think, I've been doing all this healing work. I've been single for this long. I feel really good and I'm confident. And they start dating. And the next thing you know, boom, old behavior patterns are coming back up. You don't know why you're triggered. Like you're just all over the place, but it's necessary sometimes because it's providing an opportunity for you to grow and to heal through that. And even if the relationship doesn't work, but it served its purpose
Yeah.
and to teach you.
Yeah.
more about yourself to help you become more the person you want to be dating so that you can attract that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Arguably, the most challenging relationships, the most painful ones, are the biggest catalysts for growth.
mhm. Yeah, boy, this was a growing year for me. I'm really looking forward to
Mm.
2024. Easier, hopefully. So I wanted to talk about like the now, like all of this stuff with dating and going through these triggers and understanding our attachment styles. I think this part of the attachment styles that can help you communicate with your partner so that you don't just run away when things come up and that you are more open to talking to them. It's something that you said that really sticks with me about how you communicate. So you might think you need to break up with somebody because of this communication barrier that you perceive that you have, but really it's just you're speaking to them in a way that they can't receive in a way.
Mhm.
So how would we know if that's happening? Would it be like lots of fights going on, or you're feeling like you can't resolve issues? Like how will we know if our partner is one attachment style or the other, and then how to communicate with them better?
You mean, how do we know that we have communication issues, or how do we know that we have attachment differences?
Communication issues because of our attachment differences. I think that's the question.
Um, those are usually pretty easy to spot with when if one person leans anxious and the other one leans avoidant, because avoidants are really sensitive to criticism and at their core, and avoidants are not bad guys. They want relationships very much. They have very strong feelings. They just internalize them, and their belief is that they're not good enough at relationships, that they fail at meeting people's emotional needs, that it's some task that they can't comprehend. And that makes them really sensitive to how we approach them and how we bring things up. Anxious attachers, on the other hand, are rather reactive. As much of we get a lot of good press, but we can be